Okay, now for chapter 7, Haman is well aware that something is afoot. You can only imagine how angry God is at a man in whom has not only despised one of the Jews, an innocent Jew, enough to want him dead, but has convinced the king to pass a decree to annihilate all the Jews. You can only imagine how angry God is at Haman, so most certainly he is very much troubled. Verse 1, So the king and Haman came to banquet with Esther the queen. And the king said again unto Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, What is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be performed, even to the half of the kingdom. Now, if you'll notice, this is the third time that Xerxes has made this promise unto the queen. Could there not be something noteworthy in the fact that the king gave a threefold promise unto the queen before the Lord allowed the petition to be made? And the petition is that of her life and her people's. So salvation comes by way of a threefold promise. Quite remarkable that we see a trinity of promise right here. Verse 3, Then Esther the queen answered and said, If I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. So basically she's saying that if you were to make us slaves, well, we've been slaves before in Egypt. And with this implication, she's truly illustrating that of her desperation and her people's. But also notice how verse 4 ends, because she's speaking of Haman right here. I had held my tongue. I wouldn't speak unless I absolutely felt the necessity to, although the enemy, Haman, could not countervail the king's damage. In other words, just as Joseph Benson commented, Haman's 10,000 talents would not repair the king's loss in the customs and tributes, which the king receives from the Jews within his dominions, nor the injury his kingdom would sustain by the loss of so many industrious hands out of it. Remember how Haman says, or insinuated, that the Persian Empire would be better off without the Jews? Well, Esther is now saying, no, they would be far worse off. Verse 5, Then the king Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, Who is he, and where is he, that did presume in his heart to do so? And Esther said, The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. And the king, arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden. And Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. Yeah, Xerxes was not bashful about showing his outright rage. Once again, Benson noted how Esther's sworn enemy now owns that he lies at her mercy and begs his life at her hand. Thus did God regard the low estate of his handmaiden, as he did Sarah, Rahab, Ruth, Mary. Verse 8, Then the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine, and Haman was fallen upon the bed whereon Esther was. Then said the king, Will he force the queen also before me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Now mind you, not only is Xerxes angry, but he also has wine in him. And if you've ever drank before, you know that your anger is intensified greatly. You're even at an irrational state of anger by that point. And we know that at the very beginning of the book of Esther, he's drunk with wine, and he calls Vashti to come out. She doesn't, and suddenly that's cause for a divorce, apparently, in his eyes, because he's under the influence at that time as well. So he's mad. And Harbona, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, Behold also the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, standeth in the house of Haman. Then the king said, Hang him thereon. Now do recall, Haman himself had these gallows built near his own home, and they're 75 feet tall. So everyone in the general vicinity could see whomever was executed upon them, including Haman's own family, just as Charles Ellicott notes, in his own house, that is, probably in some court or garden belonging to it, in the sight, doubtless, of his own children and his own servants, and the wife who had given him such cold comfort, did the unfortunate man meet his fate. Verse 10, so they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. And once again, the way that Persians did this, it's not the hanging by the neck that we're thinking of. It was far more brutal than that. Many believe that it was impalement or crucifixion. And of course, the irony involved here just pops right off the page. Perhaps the greatest example of this same type of irony of this was when Satan thought that he had won by getting the crowd to crucify Jesus, but the cross turned out to be the instrument of Satan's defeat. The death of a substitute satisfied the wrath of the king. In the case of Mordecai and Haman, it was the guilty dying in the place of the innocent. In the case of Jesus and us, it is a matter of the innocent dying in the place of the guilty.